love toys. You love toys. You probably love collecting toys, and that's why you're here on the Spectre Creative channel. I'm your host, Scott ToyGuru Neitlich, and like you, I am a toy collector. But I've also been blessed with being a toy maker, having been in the toy industry for over 20 years. And one of the topics suggested by Cant on the comment section was to do a video about my personal pet peeves on action figures. And hey, sure, I can do that. Keep in mind that while not all these pet peeves necessarily have a solution, I will try to kind of provide some of the industry insight to maybe why they happen. I can't guarantee that I will have all the information for all of them, and some of the information there is no way to solve. They're just pet peeves. But I am an avid collector. I, collect action figures. I hunt for action figures. I buy action figures on the secondary market when I have to. And I definitely have the things that bother me when I can't get what I want. So while I know in a lot of ways this may be calling the kettle black, because I'm probably guilty of making a lot of toys with these pet peeves in them, I should still be honest about what personally bothers me. And I have a feeling many of the things that bother me with sort of call it flaws in toys may be the same things that bother you. And while I may not use all examples of toys I worked on, and I'm not picking on any one toy company, I'll try to find the best examples I can to kind of illustrate the point. And I am going to skip over some of kind of the more, shall we say, obvious ones. Things like when there's paint errors that make a figure look, well, less than stellar. This is just, human error. This is not the way, obviously, the toy company wants the toy to look. Or when there's just, you could say, really poor design decisions made by by the manufacturer. And again, I'm not going to cover things like this. It's sort of a different realm. I'm more going to cover things that really apply to adult collectors and the things that, well, my personal pet peeves, as Colt asked for. So the first one, what I would call Cant Stand You, when you just can't stand an action figure. And no, I don't mean like when it drives you crazy and you don't like it. I mean when the action figure will not stand up. As adult collectors, the biggest thing we do with our figures is display them. And when you can't display your action figure standing, when it just collapses under its own weight, it drives one crazy. I remember in particular this Figrin Dan Modal Nodes figure that came out early in the Power of the Force 2 line could not stand unless you took his foot and put it in what was called toe tapping mode, meaning he was just sort of resting on his back ankle. If you tried to have both of his feet flat, he would fall over. And I did find it surprising that they took this same exact mold and reissued it multiple times, never correcting the feet. No matter how many times you got this figure, if both of his feet were flat on the ground, he would just fall over right flat. And I don't know, as a collector, that drove me crazy because I like my figures to be standing, not resting precariously on one ankle. Another figure that sometimes kind of has this same issue is the recent Strong Guy Build-A-Figure from Marvel Legends. And while it's understandable based on the odd proportions of the character having such a heavy, heavy top and a small bottom, meaning legs, that he's going to be prone to some tipping. So I kind of expected some of that, but I don't know. I had a really hard time getting him to stand just right on my shelf. Doctor Doom as well, another recent Marvel Legends. This one drove me crazy because I could not get him to stand up without leaning on his cape. I finally actually had to take a bunch of sticky tack, like you'd use to hang up posters, and put it under his cape to give it a little bit of leverage. Because otherwise, every time I put him on my shelf, he would either lean forward or lean backwards. And if he was leaning on his cape, it looked like he was, reclining in midair. I don't know. But just absolutely drove me bonkers that I could not get this figure to stand up straight. All right, next pet peeve. The whole idea of holding accessories incorrectly, or the inability to hold accessories, if you will, or not having the accessories one should. Sometimes action figures are darn near perfect and can hold accessories, literally perfect, like in the case of this Black Series Mandalorian that can have his rifle with both hands and even has a trigger finger that fits in the trigger. But going back in time with Star Wars, again to early Power of the Force, this early Hoth Han figure, which was an interesting choice with his hood down, but that's another video, his right hand was sculpted so he could not hold his gun. The blaster just did not fit into his gun, into his hand. It just kept falling out. You could see how wide the thumb, what's called a C grip, is. It's too big. They fixed it. You can see the running change here where they retooled his hand so that later releases would work, but the early release just wouldn't hold his gun. Another sort of example of this, and again, I know by pet peeves I'm digging deep here, but looking at another Marvel Legends figure, Bishop. So great figure. They really knocked it out of the park as far as the sculpt. The way I always saw Bishop was from the X-Men animated series when he held his futuristic gun rifle thingy with both hands, and that was he was like always posed like this, doing that like the thing. That's like an official sound effect there with how I do it. Yeah, but where he cocks the gun and then blasts. Well, when the figure came out, both of his hands were posed in trigger finger poses. So you could not put the blaster in both hands to create this iconic pose. And while I get, maybe a optimal solution would have been to have swappable hands, this does cost money, and I get why, toy companies, manufacturers need to find economical solutions and can't give you everything, but it still drove me crazy. Another example from a similar wave, or close to it, not the same wave, but same year, was the Jubilee figure that came with everything we wanted in Jubilee that we've been waiting for a 1990s style Jubilee, except for her power effects. The whole Jubilee is a very visual character when she uses her powers, and Marvel Legends has not been shy about giving blast effects, but they didn't really have a blast effect in their tooling bank, although they did have this effect from a previous Jubilee figure. And I kept saying, well, why couldn't you have at least released that? Oh, wait, I have this Jubilee figure. I can just use the effects and put them on the new one, which is what I did. But, I also get it. Expense. You can't put everything in the package. And I understand from a manufacturing standpoint. Okay, next pet peeve. The whole thing about right and wrong and sort of the justice of scales. So I like 6-inch. 6-inch is my preferred scale. I like all my figures to be in 6-inch scale so they can play together on the shelf. Well, like the McFarlane figures, as an example, are 7 inches. So they can't play with my DC Universe Classics figures, and that's a big reason why I pass on them. Bandai, when they first came out with their Thundercats figures, had them in 8 inches, and they just towered over all of the rest of my 6-inch action figure collection and didn't work with that. Incidentally, the reason that they went with 8-inch was because the vintage figures were 8 inches, and Bandai felt that doing the figures in the same scale as the vintage line was more important than having them be in scale with all modern toys, which to that I'm like, really? That was your thinking? I mean, I was obviously a big collector and maker of the Masters of the Universe Classics line, and I wanted the Thundercats to hang out with them. Another interesting example is this BBC Sherlock figure, the Benedict Cumberbatch likeness, if you will, from the recent show, which is a great show if you have not seen it. It's amazing. And while I understand that all BBC figures are 5-inch scale, that's kind of the British scale, I really wanted a Sherlock Holmes figure to be 6 inches so he could, again, hang out with my other 6-inch figures. In fact, I have a Sherlock diorama, and I have to put him all the way in the back in order to create forced perspective. And, of course, I have a great Watson figure that was released in the Black Panther line, so, that worked out well. But, yeah, Sherlock has to be all the way in the back in order to create some kind of perspective that he's in the same scale. All right, another pet peeve, the whole idea of one and done. So there's obviously a lot of action figures that we get over and over and over again. Main heroes, main villains, that kind of thing. And we can probably expect this to continue for many years. Something like Darth Vader, there's going to be no shortage of Darth Vader figures made. And there's no shortage of Darth Vaders in 6-inch scale by, gosh, at least 4 different companies, I want to say. More if you count like the 7-inch ones from Diamond Select. But there's some figures that basically aren't going to get another shot at being an action figure. Pretty much when that figure gets made, that's kind of that's your figure, if you will. I know the Horde Troopers in Master Universe Classics was guilty of this too, with a lot of fans not liking the way the head was sculpted. So my example here with this Biggs Tatooine figure, this was one of my number one sort of personal wish list figures for years when collecting modern Star Wars. And when he was finally made, I was so excited. I mean, I must have bought like 4 or 5 of them. And every single one, not only was there a lack of knee articulation, but the way the cape was done, it rubbed off on the white jacket. So almost every single figure I have has these black smears on his shoulders and back from the cape, from just being packed with it, I guess. And the chance of getting another Tatooine Biggs figure is probably pretty slim to none. All right, the next one is amalgamation figures. So by this, I mean figures that are not quite one look. So an example is the Marvel Legends Thanos that came out a few years ago. Not the new one coming out in 2021, but this one, it's not quite classic Thanos and it's not quite modern Thanos. It's kind of like a mashup of both using an existing tool for modern Thanos, basically painted like classic Thanos. I've used this Darkhawk example before as well, since he's one of my favorite heroes. Not quite modern Darkhawk, not quite classic Darkhawk. It's kind of an amalgam of all the different Darkhawks. So, yeah, pick one, basically. I wish toy companies would sort of commit to a look and not try to make a figure that is a little bit of this version and a little bit of that version, because it's not what I want as a collector. I want a definitive version of one look. Trying to make a figure work for everyone and be kind of a jack of all trades and work on every single level just doesn't work. I mean, if a figure is that popular, make 2 versions of him. All right, next up on my personal list is incomplete teams. To me, there is one of the cardinal sins of action figure making collecting is when you can't have an entire team. As an example, the Metal Men in DCU Classics, I was very determined to make sure we finished this team come hell or high water. Just having 1 or 2 members just sort of didn't work. A counterexample might be something like Legion of Superheroes, also from DCU Classics, which I worked on. We did a big set, basically as many figures as we possibly could in one. With the Legion of Superheroes that has literally hundreds and hundreds of members, getting a complete team, that's a little bit tougher. But for teams like Metal Men or the original 1990s Wildcats that Playmates put out, there's a definitive team. There's a small number of characters. It's not like Legion with hundreds. I mean, Playmates even did a extra large Maul, so you could put it with your regular sized figures and have him be gigantic. And I really appreciate this when toy companies sort of go out of their way to ensure a full team is completed. Counterexamples would be things like the Mattel Thundercats line that stopped at 4 or 5 regular releases, and then a Comic-Con 2-pack of the Cubs. I think Mumra was the subscription-only figure. Or an even better example would be the Funko Firefly set, which only included 5 members of the crew, with several crew members, clearly missing. And I get it, obviously it's sales. The line didn't sell well enough to justify including characters like River or Book, et cetera, Simon, Inara. But, again, it's like you have these figures and they're just sitting on your shelf as a glaring empty piece. It's like, I don't have the full team. I don't have the full crew. So it's kind of like, commit. Like if you're going to make the figure line, get them all out. All right, next up is distribution. Yes, I know this is a big one with so many people, and this is one that's really not on the toy companies. It's really much more on the retailers. And a lot of the problems with distribution is that current retailers, like big box retailers, are just not set up to put out product for collectors. They're designed to put out product for people who buy things every week. In particular, I remember a Power of the Force 2 R2-D2, the one with the hologram Leia. This took me like 2 years to find. I remember it just drove me crazy. I could not find this. And then finally, when I did find it at retail, it was like, ah, like hallelujah. I could not believe it. And I never understood why the distribution on this one wave was so bad. Drove me crazy. All right, rounding out my personal pet peeves, what's missing? So, not about completing teams. This is more like when figures come and they're obviously missing something, like a cape, or in this case with Necron, a scythe or scythe. The big axe thing he has. It was not included. It was sculpted. This was a figure done by the team that took over after me, and for cost reasons, whatever it was, they didn't include his accessory. And it's one of those sort of blatant, he's kind of got a signature accessory that makes him who he is. And every time you see this figure, you're left thinking, he's kind of missing something. And again, just sits there on the shelf being a beacon saying, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong. Another example is the, not Civil War, this was the Winter Soldier, Black Widow figure. Great figure, great likeness, and she has her guns permanently attached inside of her holster. For a character who spends most of the movie, as far as her fight scenes, shooting people, or, shooting off her double guns, it was a little disheartening that when I got the figure, I realized that those guns were permanently part of the sculpt, and you could not put guns in her hands. I mean, you could put the Build-A-Figure's kind of like shoulder cannon in her hands, but the guns were permanently part of the sculpt. She did not come with individual guns for posing, and that really deterred the amount of posing you could do with her. All right, so that's kind of my list. I would definitely love to know what you guys think. I don't think at all I've covered every pet peeve that collectors have, but these are definitely some of my kind of top ones that, as a collector myself, drive me crazy. And having been in the industry, it sort of double drives me crazy when I know sort of the why. And what did I miss? What pet peeves did I not cover? Leave them in the comments below. Let's have a discussion about it. Maybe I can do a follow-up video. I love hearing all the comments everyone has to say, and we'll keep making videos like this. And if you'd like it, do subscribe and give it a like, because that tells YouTube to share it with more people, and that's really the whole point, is to share fun toy videos and knowledge with others. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.